da dum da dee da 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 dum da dee da da. Oh wait, no, we're not talking about the music, are we? Look, I'm just going a bit crazy because we've talked about a lot of things over the past few years, and surprisingly, never the Danube. At least not in any meaningful detail, other than saying thanks for the base design. We're gonna slap some wings on it and call it Aero Shuttle. Yes, Dead Ronin 47 gave us the suggestion in our comment section in just about as many words as that. So here we are to give you the Trek centralized style breakdown of Doom. Hopefully with some extra bits that you definitely won't have seen or heard about anywhere else ever.
You know, the rate we go through runabouts is a good thing the Earth has so many rivers.
Welcome to Trek Central, lords, ladies, and sovereigns. I am your host, Lieutenant Commander Adam, and as always, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure you slap that subscribe button right in the face and never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe and absolutely not my terrible singing. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, we want to hear all about it. I'm sorry, I'll stop now. Oh, and don't forget to leave us suggestions for what we should cover next. Okay, engage. So, introduced to us in the premiere episode of what would soon become the most important station of the Alpha Quadrant, Deep Space Nine, home to the most important person in Federation history, Miles Edward O'Brien, we have perhaps the best shuttle design, in my humble opinion, to ever grace the Star Trek universe, the Danube-class Runabout. How is that for a trifecta? The prototype vessel, the USS Danube, Naval Experiment 72003, in keeping with the running naval tradition of naming, became the Danube-class Forerunner. It was constructed at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards in 2365 and came to be known by the colloquial term of Runabout. First commissioned by Starfleet in 2368, and it had a respectable weapon loadout for a vessel of its size, with about 4 to 6 phaser arrays, depending on the particular configuration, and 2 micro-torpedo launchers as stock. They could be retrofitted to carry additional photon torpedo launchers, and thanks to the Deep Space Nine technical manual, we've got the runabouts coming in at about 23.1 meters long, 13.7 wide, and 5.4 in height. Cruising speed is warp 2 and a maximum of 6. Standard impulse units and a passenger capacity of 40. All in all, not a bad little package indeed.
Indeed.
The hull was made up of metallic composites which could interact with magnetic fields. This made it fairly easy to find lost ships by using what Star Trek refers to as a differential magnetometer, but what the rest of the world calls a really big magnet, to detect fluctuations in the hysteresis curve. In the case of low power, each runabout had a contingency fuel cell to provide emergency power, which is all well and good, but I'm not gonna lie, my first thought was that they should just wrap the whole thing in copper wire and spin it around a little bit with that giant magnet. According to Jadzia Dax, runabouts practically fly themselves. In fact, they are capable of operating with automatic helm control.
Activate automatic helm control.
Yet they are easy for anyone to pilot. Runabouts were essentially designed to bridge the gap between vastly smaller shuttlecraft and fully fledged starships. This meant they were capable of more protracted missions, not overly practical for a shuttle, but without wasting the resources and manpower that a full-size starship would require. It's designed mainly to carry out a number of different roles, such as scientific exploration, personnel and cargo transportation, covert tactical missions, and even to act as a mobile defense platform. Typically, the runabout would be operated by a crew of 2 to 4 from the cockpit, while rudimentary sleeping bunks could be found toward the vessel's rear. That same area could also be used as a cargo hold. And in the midsection, between the 2 wing pylons, you could put a series of replaceable modules, which would differ from ship to ship and could be swapped out to fit many mission profiles. This meant it could carry science labs, extra crew quarters, emergency medical units, and photon or quantum torpedo bays, depending on its assignment. Variants that carried the additional roll bar mounted equipment pod could house even more sensor pallets or yet more weapons to fit a specific mission parameter. And before you go there, yes, that basically makes it the equivalent of Thunderbird 2, but with more DACA. The most groundbreaking feature, as well as the most useful, was its compact warp reactor core. This ingenious piece of engineering was located along the spine of the ship and worked in conjunction with the nacelles, I should hope so, despite being smaller than conventional multi-deck high warp cores found on your regular-sized starships. It was capable of a speed of warp 5. Is it 5? Or is it 6?
Warp 8.
Who do we believe? The tech manual? Eagle Moss?
Unable to comply.
A small Jeffries tube was also present, immediately underneath the warp core that ran the spine of the vessel. And at least one manual emergency hatch was located on the port side below the side station window. The Danube-class was, of course, capable of traveling at a relatively high warp speed either way, which meant that they could travel between planetary systems to carry out missions, unlike impulse-only shuttlecraft, until, of course, the Class 2, or the Type 9, or whatever the hell it was called, was introduced. They could also make planetary takeoffs and crash landings, like most of their kin, as they were fitted with vertical lift vents under the winglets. The ventral hull and nacelles could also make direct contact with the surface with very little scrapage. There's something very familiar about all this. Its defensive capabilities, coupled with shields, meant that it could take on a much larger vessel in combat, including, on occasions, Jem'Hadar attack ships. Now, I'm not saying they won very often, but it could definitely give them a run for their Ketracel White, and that is impressive for something so tiny. Other internal features included a two-person transporter and replicator, initially located immediately behind the cockpit, but later during the Dominion War, some, if not all, had them moved further to the back of the cockpit to allow for the secondary standing tactical station. Fore and aft tractor beams were also present, which could tow at least up to the size of a Cardassian Galore-class warship, and even force a sister runabout out of warp. Deep Space Nine took on an initial delivery of 3 runabouts in 2369, namely the USS Ganges, USS Yangtze Qian, and Rio Grande, and they were situated in landing bays around the station's habitat ring. All additional runabouts supplied to the station over the following years were also named after Earth's rivers. These included the Gander, the Mekong, the Orinoco, the Rubicon, the Shenandoah, the Volga, and the Yukon. These were just the named ships. Others appeared briefly only to be destroyed, boom, though at least one had an identifiable registry of NCC 73918, confirming they were not the already named ships docked at DS9. A further runabout, though unnamed, was used to travel to Empok Nor, DS9's sister station, and was destroyed by a crazed Cardassian soldier, which Nog pointed out.
That's not right.
Exactly. Runabouts were the primary method of transport for people living on DS9 and also provided defensive support to the station, especially before the arrival of the Defiant. The USS Rio Grande was the very first Starfleet or Federation vessel crewed by Lieutenant Jadzia Dax and Commander Benjamin Sisko to discover, traverse, and land in the first fully stable wormhole.
We just landed.
Subsequently known as the Bajoran wormhole, to which DS9 was relocated from Bajor's orbit to help claim and defend. For the first while, runabouts were instrumental in discovering those strange new worlds.
Space.
No, not those ones, in the Gamma Quadrant. Post-capture of Sisko, Quark, Jake, and Nog, USS Mekong and Orinoco, newly retrofitted with additional photon launchers, joined the USS Odyssey in a trip to the Gamma Quadrant to assess the threat of the Jem'Hadar, and, if possible, find out what happened to the Rio Grande and her crew. They discovered the missing runabout piloted by Jake and Nog, somewhat disabled, and sat out the ensuing fight, which led to the destruction of the USS Odyssey. Surprisingly, the 3 little ships survived the battle and were able to return to the station. When the Dominion threat increased, and it became clear that runabouts weren't sufficient enough for station defense, thus came
The Defiant.
the runabouts were still used in a number of different capacities, such as recovering the legendary Sword of Kahless, taking part in a covert mission to rescue Dr. Bashir and Inabran Tain from a Dominion prison, in one of my favorite episodes, featuring Internment Camp 371. Runabouts, in general, were still heavily used and played an important role throughout the Dominion War, and were used in exercises within the 9th Fleet. There are 2 instances as well depicting DS9 as having more than 3 on hand. Alternate 2371 showing the Orinoco, Rio Grande, Mekong, and a 4th departing the station as it was attacked. The second is Yukon, Volga, and Rio Grande noted as being docked, whilst the Rubicon was away in the Gamma Quadrant. And the only surviving, or should I say series-long surviving runabout, was the Rio Grande. While it did crash land on one occasion, it was salvaged and returned to the station. Rubicon and Volga were the only other two known, aside from the Rio Grande, to be docked at the station by the series' end. We're all surely aware of the joke that despite being a vessel native to Deep Space Nine, a Runabout also featured in The Next Generation, and it was the first and last time the rear section was ever featured on TV. This was due to Captain Picard, Data, Geordi, and Deanna returning from a conference, and they needed something bigger than a standard shuttle to cram them all into, while the mothership Enterprise was in a frozen, apparent standoff with a Romulan warbird. It's pointed out in the same episode that a Runabout did not possess the ability to generate a subspace isolation field of the magnitude required to lock on and surround the warp core of a Galaxy-class in order to beam it into space. The Danube-class was at least in service until the 2380s, where they were primarily used as rescue vessels, as evident by one used to retrieve ensigns Boimler and Mariner, and Agamus from a desert planet where their shuttle Yosemite had crashed in 2381. A Jupiter rescue runabout was launched to recover the No. 5 replica Phoenix near the moons of Jupiter, which had been commandeered a short time before from the Ride of the Phoenix theme park attraction in Bozeman, Montana. The sole occupant, Gavin, was rescued, albeit unwillingly. The Yellowstone class, while named as such and not a Danube class, is still technically a runabout. It uses stock footage of the Rio Grande, the standard vessel, and the Ganges fitted with the equipment module, which not only creates a glaring inconsistency error of two immediately and undeniably distinguishable vessels, but also subtly introduces ships of the same class, which can be referred to as their sub-variant. The same way the USS Enterprise F began her life as an Odyssey-class starship in Star Trek Online, and still is technically, but was then refit to the Yorktown-class variant, we were robbed of that in Star Trek Picard. Cherry! Sorry, that's my Kirk-itis acting up again. It happened on the Enterprise B video as well, when I said that Picard went down to the lower decks instead of Kirk. I was wrong, of course. Everybody knows it was Spock. The prototype USS Yellowstone, designed by the Starfleet Engineering Corps, was constructed in 2371 by two key members, Lieutenant Laska and Ensign Harry Kim. Kim was responsible for designing the new Tetrion plasma warp engines. There was one key design flaw in working out a dilithium fracture problem. Several weeks were spent resolving it, and it was eventually cured with new plasma flow equations. Although space-worthy, construction on the Yellowstone was still underway in 2372. Many of the ship's defensive systems were unfinished, including unplaced safety interlocks. The power plants were 2 Tetrion plasma warp nacelles and 12 microfusion thrusters. The ship's standard performance was Warp 4 for 38 hours and Warp 6.2 for 32. And of course, it's completely doubtful whether the Yellowstone actually exists in canon after all, because it technically was a massive hallucination during an episode of Voyager, but no one cares about that. It was initially referred to as Runabout class by Cisco in the pilot episode, Emissary. The official class designation, though, was Danube, and this was originally mentioned in the Star Trek Encyclopedia. The term Danube was first used in dialogue in Deep Space Nine, Season 4, episode Hippocratic Oath. Early in DS9, the writers planned to drop in runabouts named for rivers on other worlds. But producer Michael Piller noted that the need to include the explanation in dialogue would probably detract from the storytelling. As a result, every single one that was posted to DS9 was named for an Earth river, which was quickly and easily explained once by that amusing line from Kira. But quick, can you guess who designed the Danube-class runabout? I bet you can't. Are you ready? It was Jim Martin! You didn't see that coming, did you? And yes, Rick Sternbach, because he gives us all the cool stuff. After several concept arts were run through, they obviously agreed on the best one, and the interior cockpit set was designed by Joseph Hodges, all under the direction of Herman Zimmerman. Tony Meininger also constructed the miniature. According to Sternbach, the studio model of the Sydney-class USS Jenolan was to have become the basis for the runabouts before a new design was ordered. The class hull would be separated into 3 key modules and an optional 4th, the equipment pod. Starting with the all-important warp sled, which housed all of the components necessary for power generation, warp and impulse travel, and the habitat section, the command pod, which would contain the variations in the cockpits seen through their tenure on DS9, and then there's the mid-section, as mentioned before, which would be the more widely swapped section. It would stand to reason that there would be several different batches, each with a specific module installed for ease of deploying to their home bases. In the case of Deep Space Nine, they had 3 or 4 runabouts on board. Honestly, it became a bit of a running joke that the Rio Grande was the safest one, as it seemed to be used almost every single time. Maybe they just wanted to show off the new set dress for the new ship. The set for the aft section of the runabout was built specifically for the TNG episode Timescape by Richard James, and funded from the TNG budget in order to take pressure off of Deep Space Nine's finances. In-brain logistical reason for this would be to use an existing ship, which would make sense for Enterprise to be carrying, that wasn't a small, cramped shuttlecraft, wasn't necessary to take the entirety of the crew, could travel at warp, and still keep it apart from the familiar and constant use of the cockpit shown in Deep Space Nine. Design and fabrication of the set was completed within 9 days. It was the only appearance, even though the set was to have recurring uses within Deep Space Nine, but it was never used again. That said, we did however get to see Jake looking out of the rear window as a runabout departs the station. Perhaps there was intended to be some use for the set there, but that never happened. Such a shame, and honestly, a bit of a waste. The exterior CGI model was created by Vision Art Design and Animation. It proved a blessing when the episode Change of Heart featured the Shenandoah flying through an asteroid belt and landing in the Sukara jungle, a shot among many that would have been almost impossible to do with motion control, as stated by Adam Buckner. Thank you all for your suggestions so far. We're all doing our best to keep a track of them, so if you don't see it straight away, be patient. It may well be in the pipeline. We just have some others to catch up on, but nevertheless, keep them coming. Did we cover anything you didn't already know? Is there anything we missed? Or are you just glad we were here to give our madhouse take on an otherwise widely covered ship? Did you remember something that was once drummed into your head in high school about magnets? If you want to keep up to date on these and all the other latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure you hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central, and you can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Lieutenant Commander Adam. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends.